Mobs of progressive students roam America's campuses, social justice vigilantes in search of an outrage, real or imagined, that provides the flashpoint from which to strong-arm change, or else. Next on Campus Roundup. Hello, I'm Dr. Duke, and this is Campus Roundup at the College Fix. Our top story segment this week focuses on the attack of the leftist mob and considers how roving bands of ideologically driven, intolerantly progressive students are gumming up campus freedoms and using threats of violence to bully faculty and administrators into hasty and illiberal reforms. To discuss his impactful articles exposing this alarming campus trend, we welcome Michael Jones, a business major at Auburn University and a contributing journalist at the College Fix. Michael, from Reed College to Texas State University to Dartmouth, coast to coast, you have foregrounded the success radical student mobs are having on American campuses. Mike, why do you think there is so little resistance to the implicit violence behind these increasingly disturbing instances of mob pressure at our colleges and universities?
Thank you for having me on, Dr. Duke. I think a big part of why there isn't like a big pushback from the administration is because the administration as a whole of most of these campuses is really not against the mobs of them. They might not be on the same side with everything, but for the large part, they mostly agree with them. And I mean, I think if these were conservative groups doing this on campus, there would be huge pushback and it would never get off the ground.
That's a great point, Mike. I mean, you think about that. If groups of conservative students, mobs, so to speak, 20, 30 large, started invading professors' university classrooms, sitting in on university professors' lectures because they were too liberal, this would not be tolerated in the least. As you've done your research on these articles, very well-written articles, have you tried to get a hold of university administrators? Have you gotten any condemnation of this behavior from university officials?
I wouldn't say any like broad condemnation of it. Like nothing explicitly saying, "Hey, we do not agree with these people." I don't get any of that.
What do they do? I mean, do they kind of ignore the issue altogether? I mean, they're awfully quick, aren't they, as your articles report, to cave in to these leftist protesters. So when you try to talk to them, what kind of things do they say to you at the administrative level?
It's mainly broad statements, talking about what they're planning to do, if they're planning to go meet their demands and meet their needs. That's a majority of what it is.
Yeah, and it's mostly kind of these garden variety reassertions, right, of we believe in free speech, we believe in the right of everybody to have a say, but they only believe in the right of certain groups to actually change things, not others. Talk a little bit about what happened out at Reed College in Oregon. This was a really telling story. You had groups of mobs, campus progressive mobs, student mobs, do what exactly?
So it started with them protesting a class because it was too white, too Eurocentric, when in reality the class it did focus on Western civilization, but it also included Egypt and ancient Mesopotamia. So it wasn't just a class about great white thinkers, but they invaded it for probably a year and a half, had signs, would interrupted once, heatedly debated some students in the class, young freshman students. And it eventually evolved into them going in, holding like month-long sit-ins in administration buildings until they could finally protest enough to get it changed. And they actually the administration has folded to the students.
This is remarkable. You have basically a freshman course, basically Western Civ 101. Bunch of freshmen, impressionable freshmen, their first time on campus, hearing a course about Western thinkers. A course that you pointed out isn't even really a Western thinker course completely anymore. The professor willfully expanded this course to include Egypt and Mesopotamian cultures, certainly non-Western cultures, to do all of that as a way of preempting this kind of meaningless protest. But for you say this didn't go on for weeks. This went on for over a year, these protests. Where was the campus? Where were the campus police? Where were the authorities that were allowing these kids who were paying for this class to actually hear it? Did they intervene at all? Did they do anything to try to mitigate this protest?
So the campus authorities did not really do anything to do it until it got violent, and then they put some made it where the students couldn't see certain faculty, just a couple of them, not them as a whole. But they were largely absent in the most part. They would say we agree with their right to protest, we agree with their right for free speech, until it came down to them actually having really heated debates with freshmen, and the freshmen were really concerned because they were actually paying for the class, so they really wanted to hear it, and they weren't happy with it at all.
The administration said, as kids were protesting actual ongoing classes that they were not enrolled in, we respect their right to free speech, and we respect their right to protest. Mike, what if you got a group of conservative kids at Auburn University together to march right into the next Board of Regents meeting at Auburn University and protest? Do you think they would respect your right to interrupt their business then?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. So again, this is one-sided rhetoric, isn't it? It's one-sided. Talk a little bit. That's Reed College, and they changed the course, as you said. Also pretty alarming is what's going on at Texas State University, where a Republican conservative who's in charge of the student government is now under fire, and they want him removed. Talk a little bit about that.
So Connor Clegg, the student body president at Texas State, is under major fire. The campaign is being led by the author of the infamous White Death article in the Texas State newspaper, and it's basically just some post mocking Asians from 4 years ago, and they have led march. They had a meeting and violently protested. I mean, people were yelling. The cops had to be called several times, and it was really alarming. They were sitting there protesting for probably 3 hours, leading chants, talking about his impeachment, and hey, he's got to go, all of that, and it was really alarming. So
it's really remarkable here is that this university, this student Republican who's in charge of the political government of the arm of the student body there, 4 years ago when he was on vacation, he made some unfortunate remarks about Asians. 4 years later, a young man by the name of Martinez, who was responsible for that infamous article in the newspaper there, the student newspaper there, calling for the death of white people. He's the one now leading this charge. It is remarkable. You have a student who was involved in journalism on campus, who called for the actual death of white people, who is now suffering no real ramification for that. He is, however, leading this march to have this Republican who's in charge of government removed. Is that about the size of it?
That's essentially the argument behind it.
And when this student, Martinez, called for the death of white people on campus, many campus voices defended his right to say that. And now Martinez is using his freedom of speech to try to run another person off campus because of their politics.
That is essentially it.
Mike Jones of Auburn University. To hear more from student reporters like Michael, follow the College Fix on Twitter and on Facebook. Time now for Talking Campus, our weekly discussion with members of the College Fix editorial team. Today I'm joined by College Fix editor Jennifer Cabani for a conversation about mob politics on American campuses. Jennifer, for the entirety of my academic life, from high school to college to grad school to the professoriate, I have been warned by academics about the dangers of mob thinking, how it is the polar opposite of critical thinking, how it inevitably leads to violence, how it undermines the very core principles of education. But in every instance, the examples used to illustrate the absurdity of mob rule were always derived from conservative movements and conservative organizations. Today, it's as if our academics are stark blind to the destructive consequences of progressive student-driven mobs. What factors, in your opinion, drive this willful blindness?
Well, essentially, the left wants to control the campus debate, control the campus narrative. So they use bullying, aggressive tactics to shame other ideas, silence other ideas, shut them down, so that, unfortunately, there isn't a free exchange of ideas on campuses anymore. It's a control issue. They really want to silence the other side.
I think it's a wonderful point, and I actually call what these campus student groups, the word I've coined for them is MIBs, little mobs, right? Because they're really small groups of 15 or 20 kids who manage to completely shut down speakers, manage to completely transform the way administrators think. I call them MIBs because the larger mob that controls them is exactly what you just said. It's the faculty and the administration who are really seeing their cause advanced by allowing this to go on. Every now and then, as we've seen from these articles, sometimes the university professors, the faculty, and the administrators get pushed farther than they want. Talk a little bit about some of the wonderful articles the Fix has done. Talk about what's going on in places like Reed College, where you had a very small group of MIBs shut down a Western civilization course because it was dared to be Western Civ and not something else.
Yes, so in that particular instance, what we had was a university that had an excellent course on the foundations of Western civilization. And instead of telling these young people, hey, you don't come to college and tell us what to teach you. You come to college and we tell you what's important to learn, what's important to understand, including the underpinnings of Western civilization, Plato, Socrates, what have you. But instead, these students were like, oh, they're all white men. We don't want to learn from them. Change it. And so what did Reed do? It acquiesced. And it said, you know what? We're going to add some authors of color. We're going to add some different geographic areas, such as New York and the Americas. So essentially, the small group of whiny, allegedly oppressed students going to a 50,000 per year school got their way. Instead of the grown-ups telling the kids, hey, look, we're in charge. We know what's best for your education. That's why you came to us.
Well, that's really exactly it, isn't it? That in many ways, these kids are a Frankenstein's monster. They are created by the faculty themselves. They are generated by faculty outrage cliques to get angry about everything. It's kind of backfiring in the sense that it's getting mad at them now. The person who taught that course was a doctrinaire liberal. The school itself had made overtures to include, like you said, other non-Western voices in that course. The fact that you had a course devoted to Western culture at all was the problem. And there's no way around this. You think about what happened at Evergreen State College with that biology professor, a doctrinaire liberal himself, who was ordered off campus, told not to show up because your presence here was offensive against minority groups. This is really starting to backfire big time. Are we seeing any movement on America's campuses by administrators to rein in the left on these campus protests?
Not as often as I'd like, unfortunately. They definitely need to do a better job of being the grown-ups and saying to the students, we appreciate your concerns, but you're paying us to help you gain the skills you need to have a productive career. That's why the College Fix does what it does, because we hope that readers might email a college president or email the boards of trustees and be like, do you realize what's going on? And can you take a stand here for common sense and for academic inquiry? If the leaders actually heard from concerned people more about what's going on in higher ed, I think they would take a stand more. We're slowly seeing that. Some donors have voiced their concern, but these colleges have such ginormous endowments that it's almost an insurmountable task to kind of turn the ship. It's like turning the Queen Mary, right? I mean, it's slow going, but we're trying.
Well, that's the thing. I think why I use the phrase Frankenstein's monster, because what you've created here is a group of kids that you're not educating. You can't educate students who believe their race or their gender or their very youth allows them to dictate to tenured faculty members who've been part of a larger ongoing academic conversation for 40 or 50 years. This is the dangerous element about this, isn't it? That it's so counter-intellectual. It's the argument that the younger you are, the more different your race, the more alternative your gender, the more absolute moral authority university professors are conferring on you. And it's beginning to swallow them up as well. How do we balance the scales in terms of experience versus radical activism in politics? I guess the question I have is, don't you need that? You need these kids to be less educated, but more angry, or you're not going to be able to overturn the core of universities like small pockets of radical faculty want.
Well, one thing I hear a lot nowadays is these young people are talking about their quote unquote lived experiences. So essentially what they've experienced, their feelings, their emotions, the little things that happen to them in their life, they argue are more important than whatever it is this professor is trying to teach or whatever it is this peer is trying to argue. So that is why they feel so indignant. They're growing up in this culture, this me generation, where they feel like their emotions, their feelings are more important than reality. And unfortunately, with helicopter parenting and the coddling of the American mind, as it's been called, these young people it's just getting worse and worse. They just, like what Michael wrote an article about the young man at Dartmouth who dared to report that a campus program hired far more women than men. And for that, he was essentially figuratively crucified just for pointing out a fact. So again, emotion is trumping logic. Emotion is trumping academic inquiry. Emotion is trumping truth. These lived experiences are more important to these young people than actually learning. And the administrators are letting it happen, and the professors, to a large extent, are letting it happen as well, and are part of the problem.
Yeah, that Dartmouth story was illustrative. This was a college program to hire tour guides, basically, to hire students to chaperone parents and kids around who are considering going to Dartmouth. And over 80% of those chosen were women. And for simply pointing this out, this young white male student was actually called, I get why you might, in a twisted way, call him a misogynist. How dare you? It should be 100% women. But he was also called homophobic and transphobic for simply pointing out that for every one male, there were 4 or 5 women hired for the position. Now, Jennifer, we've been doing this for about 3 weeks now at the College Fix with the College Roundup. You had mentioned earlier just what an impact the College Fix has already had on trying to move universities the right way when faculty and administrators pay no attention. Talk a little bit about how you think the College Roundup has gone for us and the impact it's beginning to make to help the College Fix try to right what's wrong on these campuses.
Well, we'd like to shine a light on some of the absurdities on college campuses. And what's been really neat, we started this about 6 weeks ago, and to see these young journalists, get on the air and tell their stories in front of a YouTube audience and to share what they've experienced, what they've reported on, it really gives them a powerful voice. I love our Campus Roundup so far. It's been such a fun addition to the College Fix repertoire to offer not just the written word, but really to show these students that their voice matters and to give them a platform that they didn't have before. So it's been exciting, it's been impactful, and I would certainly recommend our regular listeners and our viewers to go back and make sure they watch all the student interviews and the editor interviews too. We're really enjoying getting to know our audience better and to bring this new platform to life.
Yeah, I wanted to follow that up with the College Fix editors, too, because it really is a neat perspective. You guys are busy mentoring these kids. You're trying to shepherd these kids through the pitfalls, the leftist pitfalls of universities, some of the most anti-conservative places in our culture today, and give them the journalistic skills and the bravery they need to be able to report under fire that way. So we've personally heard a lot about how the College Fix editor interviews have helped change people's minds as well. So it's a wonderful collection of things that we're able to do here. We want to thank you very much for your mentorship of this program, the College Roundup, and we do encourage people to continue watching. Jennifer Cabani, editor at the College Fix, be sure to stay up on all the latest news and information from the College Fix editors by joining us on all of our social media platforms. Abraham Lincoln once observed that there is no grievance that is a fit object of redress by mob law. Contrary to this sentiment, and in contempt for the painful and oft-relived lessons of history, college campuses are beginning the descent into mob-driven student anarchy, where those who champion speech, liberty, and the free exchange of ideas are bullied, silenced, and in increasing numbers, subjected to violence. The visible mob, those that make for the most compelling headlines, is in almost every instance comprised of surprisingly small groups of zealous and callous students who believe they are empowered to bring about by any means necessary their narrow and divisive vision of social justice. These confrontational tactics, antagonistic behavior, and default to threats of violence would never be tolerated on college campuses if enacted by conservative, Republican, libertarian, or Christian students. Nor would they be tolerated if leftist professors banded together, mob-like, and behaved in this manner. Indeed, such behavior is precisely what progressive faculty seek to expose and condemn, to the exclusion of almost everything else, when teaching about traditional or non-progressive aspects of our culture or our history. So what then is the fix? The reality is that these relatively small, highly motivated campus mobs, I call them mini-mobs or MIBs, are merely the face of a broader, more pervasive movement on campus that is underwritten and sustained by a corrupt faculty culture and a cynical administrative class. These student MIBs are allowed to protest, censor, shut down debate, drive away conservative speakers, and demand, and receive, irrational and destructive reforms simply because that is what faculty elites wanted in the first place. As is always the case with mobs, these students are merely tools, blunt instruments manipulated by faculty to jackhammer away at the foundations of traditional values and classical education. The only power they have is that which is granted them by their academic enablers. We must challenge these students with accurate history and refute the absolute moral authority conferred upon them by their tenured guides. Critical thinking and a correct understanding of human nature is the cure, two things that used to be the primary purpose of higher education, but which have been rejected in favor of ideology and fever swamp politics. More skepticism toward faculty groupthink and more cynicism towards the campus MIBs who serve them would bring much needed balance and perspective to our colleges and universities. Speaking about the dangers of mob manipulation in the wake of World War II, Hannah Arendt wrote that only the mob and the elite can be attracted by the momentum of totalitarianism itself. The masses have to be won by propaganda. By not rigorously opposing the propagandistic echo chambers of academic social justice discourse, we are merely allowing the faculty elites and their campus mobs to win, virtually unopposed, the vast masses of traditional students who seek only education, not indoctrination. To quote Diogenes, that most famous of ancient cynics, the mob is the mother of tyrants. And that's the final fix. I'm Dr. Duke. We'll see you next week. For more videos and original articles, visit thecollegefix.com. And don't forget to like The College Fix on Facebook and follow on Twitter to receive your daily dose of right-minded news and commentary from across the nation.